Hello again to all subscribers and listeners of this channel. Today, we'll be speaking about why the BMI sucks and why it should never again be used as a measure of healthy body weight. But first, let's start with the basics. What is the BMI? Well, let's start. 1. What does the BMI or body mass index measure? As I've just stated, BMI is the acronym for body mass index. The BMI is supposed to be a universal measure of human beings' weight divided by our height, if I got the equation right. The basic equation for BMI is body mass in kilograms divided by your height times itself. So in other words, you take your body mass, usually in kilograms, and then you divide it by your height squared. Note, this formula, as far as I know, works a lot better than the metric measurements. The imperial measurements get a little bit more tricky. So let's say weight over height times height equals 75 kilograms divided by 2 meters times 2 meters. So the formula will look like, well, I might put this on the screen if I can. So you end up having a formula of, okay, the guy weighs 75 kilograms and is a little more than 6 feet tall. So 2 times 2 is 4, and 4 divided into 75 is 18.77. So this BMI will be 18.7. Once a score is obtained, the score is placed on usually 4 or 5 categories of weight. Underweight is considered 16 to 18.5 or 18.5. Healthy weight is considered 18.5 to 25. Overweight is considered 25 to 30. Obese is 30 to 35. Very obese is 35 to 40. And 40 or higher is considered morbidly or dangerously obese. It was created by Adolphe Quetelet, I hope I pronounced that right, and this is how it says it, but it was created sometime between 1830 and 1850, so almost 200 years ago, and has been used to measure human body weight ever since. So when you hear about an obesity crisis in the United States, realize that these obesity figures are based off of the BMI scaling. 2. Why is the BMI being used? Ultimately, it's being used to measure people's body weights because it's cheaper, streamlined, and easier for doctors and health practitioners to work with. Whereas the other ways of measuring people's body weight is more expensive for them or for you, depending on how you're going to get this done. It's more complex, and it's just overall harder to conduct. It needs a lot more resources and more precise machinery. Although the other processes of body weight measuring are more accurate. Scientist Ansel Keys, somewhere in the 1970s, I believe, he did specifically say, and he specialized in health and nutrition, spoke about the BMI, and he stated that it was inadequate, very inadequate, to judge an individual's weight with the BMI, but that the BMI could be used to evaluate populations as a whole. Unfortunately, medical science didn't take this statement seriously, and for the past multiple decades, as the BMI has been used incorrectly as the gold standard for measuring the healthy body weight of individuals. Number 3, why it's inaccurate. Here's why the BMI is inaccurate. It has reduced the human body into two-dimensional form and then simply divides height by weight. So shorter people should be lighter and taller people should be heavier. But the human body is not built like that. Measuring the human body's weight is not that simple. A. Humans are composed of skin, body fat, muscle, organs, bone, and fluids, along with many other minor things. As in, we're three-dimensional, multi-layer, complex objects. We're not a piece of cardboard. B. Different people fill out differently. Some folks have more muscle, some have more fat, some of us have denser skeletons. Therefore, any two people will not gain weight in the same parts of the body as the other. The BMI also just says what a healthy and unhealthy body weight is, completely ignoring football players, bodybuilders, powerlifters who naturally have heavier builds. Getting bigger/heavier does not automatically equal getting fatter or less healthy. Also, getting mass in your legs, butt, and thighs adds more weight than size. You get heavier, but not much bigger. While getting mass in your upper body adds more size, but it doesn't add as much weight. Usually because your upper body is a little bit lighter than your legs. So you end up getting wider and rounder without getting much heavier. C. People's weight can change dramatically for different reasons. Some people eat too much food, others eat certain poorer foods and avoid the healthier ones. Others may have a hormonal problem. Others may have water retention, and the weight that people gain and lose is not exactly the same either. D. It also seems to standardize the healthy body around only a certain type of people, or the ideal weight numbers seem to be standardized for only a very small and limiting range, somewhere between 5'3" and 6'5", or so for men, and about 5'0" to 6'0" for women. I could be slightly off though. In other words, people below a certain body weight are given a slightly higher body weight than what is healthy for the healthy range, whereas people above a certain height are given a much lower body weight than what is healthy for the healthy body weight range. Or you could say it as shorter people's weights are overestimated and taller people's healthy weights are underestimated. If you crunch numbers and do the math on one of these BMI calculators online, I'll put a link to it. Just do the math yourself and you start to see what's wrong with it. It also appears to be standardized for what appears, I could be wrong, but what appears to be the white European body structure, which a lot of people obviously don't have. E. It doesn't designate whether you're healthy or not. There are millions of people who have a healthy body weight according to the BMI, but they're still very unhealthy. They may smoke or drink too much or whatever, but they don't gain a lot of body weight. And then there are people who have checked with their doctor and they find in multiple different ways that they're in good health, but they still register a BMI over 25, which considers them overweight. But again, the BMI doesn't measure actual overall health. It only measures a supposedly healthy body weight. For examples, Yao Ming is overweight with a weight of about 315 pounds at a BMI of 27.9. Serena Williams, whose body weight is probably around 170 pounds, gets a BMI of about 27.3. Or Brock Lesnar, who gets a BMI of 35.3, considered obese, dangerously obese, even though he's 6'2" and weighs about 275 pounds. But again, the BMI does not take into account that these three and many others are like them are taller than average, very muscular, carried their weight throughout certain parts of the body, and have been athletic ever since they were very young, pretty much their entire lives. But according to the BMI, they're overweight. So according to the BMI, and you have to picture this to see how absurd it is, Yao Ming, his official healthy body weight should be only 240 pounds. Serena Williams should weigh only 140 pounds. And here's the funny one. according to the BMI standards, Brock Lesnar should weigh somewhere around 170 to 180 pounds. About 100 pounds less than what he weighs now. Brock Lesnar. Imagine Brock Lesnar at 170. So, it's obvious that not only would these body weights be too small for their sport, but all three would also be very unhealthy, not very strong, or athletic. They wouldn't be able to do their sport as well if they actually weigh what the BMI says they should weigh. This is a prime example of the BMI being a severely misused way of evaluating healthy body weight. By the way, when I found these measurements, I tried to see if I can get them at about a 21 or a 22. So these measurements of what the BMI says all three should weigh is about the mid-range. So there you go. Four, what this means for certain populations. A, what this means is that certain populations are going to be unfairly considered overweight, and in some instances assumed to be overfat, as ridiculous or as incorrect as that may seem. B, these populations of people that are going to be grossly miscategorized by the BMI are athletes, bodybuilders, people taller than average, much taller than average, about like 6'5" or more, shorter than average, of about 5'0" or less, most people of African descent, especially black women, people who are naturally more bottom heavy, people who tend to naturally carry more muscle. C, what this means is mass misdiagnosing of obesity, which leads to mass over-prescribing of drugs and or treatments, which leads to anxiety over the wrongfully considered body weight, and a mass amount of resources being wasted on these people to prescribe, diagnose, and treat what may be a perfectly healthy person. D, also, for many years in my life, I've heard about how black people in general are the most overweight, especially black women. Now I am convinced that too many black women are overweight. But with this understanding of the BMI being used to judge most people's weights and basically being useless and being vastly overused, I'm pretty sure the obesity rate of black women in particular has been severely overstated. They're heavier, but if one understood the physiology of West Africans, which is what most black people essentially are, West and Central Africans, one quickly understands why the measurements are deeply flawed. Number 5. Examples of women being built differently. If we were to line up a group of women, each of a different, racial or ethnic group, and each were to represent what the average healthy weight woman of that racial group is built like, this is how they appear to measure up. Take a white woman, an Indian woman, a black woman, an Asian woman, Latin women, and maybe Native Americans. Make sure each one is about 5'4" tall. And will they weigh the same? No. No, they won't, and no, they shouldn't. Here's why. And by the way, these aren't necessarily scientific, but these are just my general observations of what I would guess. So take that in mind. But if it's a 5'4" white female, you're looking at about maybe 120 to 130 pounds. Why? It seems that the BMI is most likely based off of the European physiology. So the ideal seems to fit white European females a little bit more for the BMI than others. Also, white females, from what I noticed, they tend to be a bit more top heavy and not as bottom heavy. And again, like I said earlier, you tend to carry more of your weight in the bottom part of your body than the top part. So if you tend to be more top heavy, you might look a bit larger but not weigh as much. Whereas people who are bottom heavy are the opposite. They weigh more but don't look as big. A 5'4" Indian woman from India, the actual subcontinent, might weigh about 122 to 130 pounds. And why? They appear to have a build more similar to what Europeans have, at least is what it looks like, in terms of stature and bone density. Maybe slightly more bottom heavy, I don't know. Just a guess. Now here's the interesting one. 5'4" tall black women. They should weigh, from what I see, about 135 to 145 pounds. Why would that be? Well, here's why. Black women tend to have denser skeletons, larger thighs, and larger asses. Because of the lower body is more massive to begin with, adding more weight to one's thighs and butt will increase body weight, but it won't increase overall volume as much. More weight but similar internal volume equals denser. Black women are a bit heavier than they look. And a lot of people have agreed with this when they've done their own like little anecdotal weigh-ins. A 5'4" Asian woman, probably about 125 to 135 pounds. Why? Asian women tend to feel that slightly more broadly than white European women, mostly in the thighs and the lower leg. But they appear to have a slightly less dense body. It seems so. So they end up being just a tad heavier than their white European counterparts. Although I am talking about the East Asians, like the Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, Cambodians, those type. Also the Northeast Asians, I noticed they seem to be a bit more top heavy, whereas the South Asians tend to be a bit more bottom heavy. If anybody else notices this, let me know. Latin women, if she's about 5'4", she's probably going to be about 132 to maybe 142 pounds. Why? Latin women tend to have a mix of European, Native American, and African genes. So this should give them wider hips, larger lower bodies, and slightly denser skeletal structure. Therefore, a bit more body weight for their height. In other words, a little bit more denser. Maybe not as dense as the black women, but a little more dense than the other groups. A Native American woman, probably 125 to 135. Why? Because most of them, especially in the Midwestern and like maybe most of Canada where they are, they seem to be very close to Asians in terms of their physiology. So it's assumed that they'll probably weigh about the same as them, give or take a few pounds. Number 6, examples of athletes being built differently. These athletes are built for their sport. They're not underweight or overweight. If they were either, they would not be able to perform for their particular sport. So let's go. A. Basketball players are generally tall. They have relatively long limbs, strong but thinner muscles, with powerful hip, thigh, and calf muscles. The basketball player is not underweight. They are built adequately for their sport. B. Football players are a bit wider shouldered, with very strong thighs and very dense core muscles, abs and obliques. Football players are not too heavy. They're built adequately for their sport. C. Sprinters are immensely strong but very compact. Very tight musculature that sits close to the body, with very low body fat levels, very strong cores, and very strong thighs. They're built the way sprinters are supposed to be built. D. Marathoners have thin, long bodies, much less musculature, average body fat percentages, and longer limbs. They're not underweight. They're built perfectly for their marathoning. E. According to the BMI, the above athletes are either overweight or underweight. It will completely ignore the fact that different athletes are conditioned for that specific sporting activity. 7. What are the more accurate ways of measuring healthy body weight / overall health? A. Because these other more accurate measurements are more complex and trickier to explain. I'll post links below to sites that can explain them a little bit better. So check the link in the description box. Now, I want to put a disclaimer. Are people overweight in the United States? Yes. But do we know how overweight they are? Not as much as we would like to think we do. This vlog is not giving the okay for people to be fat and unhealthy. It is simply identifying a very crude and incorrect way to measure human body weight. And this vlog is not saying that people can be fat and healthy, nor is it endorsing the healthy at any size nonsense. Not endorsing that. It is indeed unhealthy to have much of your body weight be derived from your body fat. All I'm saying is we need to use a much more accurate way of defining what healthy human body weight is, how much of it is body fat, and how much and where a human being must have this body fat before we can consider how healthy or unhealthy they are. In conclusion, ultimately the use of the BMI by the medical community is very lazy. It's a cheap, streamlined way of measuring people's health/fitness, when in reality, if one considers things like nutrition, ethnicity, age, gender, height, frame, bone density, physical activity, etc., they will very quickly realize why the BMI is flawed, and why it's a piece of junk, and why it should have been discarded a long time ago as a proper measure of human health and fitness. That is all for now. Please like, subscribe, and share for more. I'm out. Peace.